Finally got a chance to speak with you.
Yep. Well, however this is supposed to go, I'm not too familiar with this kind of stuff.
Oh, it's not a professional thing at all. Don't forget that I'm just a dude who decides to
Yeah,
put
yeah.
himself out there on a public platform. There's nothing special about me, so think of it as an informal chat at best.
All right. Well, appreciate that.
How's your
And
game coming along?
it is coming along very almost on time. I crack away at it pretty intensely right now because I've got a lot of free time on my hands at the moment. So I've been spending most of the day, every day, kind of cracking away at it. But we're almost there. I'm hoping to I wanted to get it out by February 15th, and I think it'll be ready by then, but I'm not so sure that, fiddling about with store pages, I'll be able to get it out by then.
Is
I
it a
think
hassle?
their whole,
Sorry, go on.
it can be a bit of a hassle. It's mostly waiting for them to review stuff. Because if it doesn't get the first review or you muck something up, it's like a week or two between stuff.
Hold the phone. You're saying that there's a filtering or review process on Steam? Or are you talking about
Um,
Meta?
I believe there is on Steam. There definitely is on Meta. Meta, it is a whole insane thing. But Steam, I'm pretty sure, because they review the Steam page at least, and I'm pretty confident. I don't know if they have like a manual person reviewing it, but there is definitely some sort of process with the game build, I'm pretty sure.
So they have to make sure it's, stable, it's not going to infect the servers or something, that it's not a virus.
Yeah, it's probably some kind of um artificial intelligence thing checking it. But I know with the store page, I was getting, just as a complete random, like complete unknown thing, I was getting like a person was giving me feedback from Steam about my store page. So I assume there's some kind of process there, but they say it takes a couple days, and it definitely does. You submit it and then you wait around for about a week until they get back to you. So
Right. So it's not necessarily about the game itself, it's more about the presentation on the store.
yeah, I'm not sure why they go about it because you see the games on Steam, you can get pretty much anything up there.
Right.
But I'm getting notes about my store page, and they're telling me I need to change stuff before I can. They were pretty particular about how I should present my game before they'd let me put up a Steam page.
Probably to maintain some kind of store standard rather than caring
Yeah.
about what the game actually is, because as you said, we can see all kinds of stuff on Steam with seemingly no
Yeah.
filtering at all. Well then, I guess it would be apt for the listeners to know what your game is. So how would you describe the game as the dev? What kind of game is it?
It's Doom VFR, but
hmm
way better.
I never actually
It's like
played that.
I haven't either, but I saw it was it was one of the initial things that made me want to do it because Doom VFR was just a train wreck. So I just really wanted to see like a Doom style, really fast paced game in VR, and there wasn't for some reason. So I threw it together,
How long has it taken you
which is
so
kind of
far?
it has been a very long time because I'm all self taught. So I've been doing this just in my free time for like 4 years, which this build of the game, it doesn't take 4 years to get what I've got in here, but 4 years of kind of learning, I would say, because I don't have any formal education in this stuff. The first time I cracked open a YouTube tutorial for Unity was 4 years ago, and then this sort of version of the game, if you want to call it that, has probably been like 2 years.
I was just about to ask you how you learnt it, but it's via YouTube tutorials.
Yeah,
Are they good? Is it an effective way to learn?
they it depends how you can use them. I reckon it's if you approach it the right way, I don't think you really need anything more. because you just kind of you watch the tutorial to do the basic stuff. Like for me, you watch a tutorial to do the generic stuff that there are tutorials for, and then when you start getting into more specific stuff, you go onto Reddit and forums and stuff, and you get a little more information, and then just that and sort of a general base of knowledge that builds up from the tutorials, you just kind of figure things out.
How did you stay motivated to do this for all of these years, though?
The lack of the game existing, pretty much.
Okay.
Because you have because I just wanted like Boneworks, but Doom. Boneworks, but like really fast and with like super cool shotguns. So, and then it kept not existing, and I kept really, really wanting it to exist, and so I just kept cracking away at it.
And that desire has stayed with you ever since?
Yeah, I think it just keeps growing because the more, I guess, coming into it from no formal experience, it's like every new thing, every new feature that I can't look up a tutorial for or that I haven't seen in another game kind of feels like it must be an impossible task. And then eventually I crack it, and all of a sudden it's like everything's possible.
Yeah, I get you. It opens up so many more doors of what you could be doing, and one thing leads to another, right?
Yeah, and just the more I get done, the more real what could be done becomes, and then I can't stop. Like there is such a wealth of potential. Like with VR, I've gotten super into VR mechanics specifically, and what can be done with that kind of stuff, and it just there's so much that I want to do that I haven't been able to explore, and that I'm not going to be able to explore for a couple years because I want to go in on this game, and it's just that kind of backlog of all the cool stuff that I want to try out and that I want other people to try out. It's just there is a never-ending supply of motivation for it.
Give me an idea of what it is that you want to try out, what you think is cool.
Dude, the next game. Then all right, so essentially my big plan, right, is I want to do this game, and hopefully it gets popular, I make a bit of money and get a bit of clout kind of in the industry.
Yeah.
And then from that I want to work with people smarter than me.
Yes.
To kind of put together, because I've been forced to become a bit of a jack of all trades. So I'm very aware that, I mean, the fact that I've been able to do what I've been able to do at my skill level, because I wouldn't consider myself very, very, very good at this stuff, but I've still been able to pull together something I'd consider pretty substantial. So just being able to get a team together of people smarter than me, some incredible stuff could be done. I mean,
for example?
oh yeah, for example, what I wanted to do is the next game, because this game is I'm kind of embracing the jankiness of it. Not jankiness, but it is very duct taped together, and I'm kind of embracing the big, wide movements. It's a very fast and loose kind of game. So the next game I want to do with some smarter people and a much more advanced enemy AI and rig, and like player rig and arms. I want to do a completely sword-based game, completely melee-based, which we've all heard it before, and it's like super overplayed. And honestly, I feel like it could be a lot better than it is. Stuff like Blade and Sorcery and Battle Talent and all these games that are just like melee-based games, I don't know, man, they miss the mark, and I feel
agree.
like they're not bad, but they could be so much better, and it's impossible to describe without going on an couple hour long rant.
Yeah, that really is the crux of VR, isn't it? There's so much about it that's very hard to describe, but if you were to see it happen, if you were to see it being played, it would all just make sense. This is possible. this should be done this way this entire time. Yeah, I feel the same way too, and I also struggle to put it into words. So I think that we share somewhat there for sure. To go back to the example though, would you be able to give a definite example of a mechanic or an interaction that you would like to do?
I think there's a guy that I would love to speak to that I do not have nearly enough clout to be able to speak to or to get in contact with. But
Who?
it's Nimsoni. I think his YouTube channel is
Ah,
now
yeah,
Nimso Studios.
yeah.
His his Project TX thing is insane, and there's parts of it which taken and used very because he's building a very sandbox experimental kind of thing. But his system for the arms, I forget what he calls it, but I'll call it like a tendon system, whatever you want to call it. It's all the individual muscles and stuff. They all have their own strength, and the arm is a whole physical object. You know,
Hmm.
it is starting at the shoulder and applying forces to the bicep and the forearm and the hand to reach that position. And that has so much potential. That is the reason that games like Blade and Sorcery are missing the mark. It's that because the way it happens now is the hand is a floating object with forces, equal forces applied in any direction, and it just kind of floats in the air, and then the
Hmm.
arm gets slapped on after. But this whole body rig arm system, it would introduce a whole different element. It would be the way you hold your weapon, the distance you hold it to you, the way you move your elbow to support it
Hmm.
becomes part of wielding the weapon, and that with a whole movement system and enemy AI and all this other stuff catered around that specifically, I think in Blade and Sorcery, all these games, I think the biggest example is they all end up with a slow motion button.
Hmm.
I think very strongly that there is a game just like those where you can do all of that cool stuff without having to rely on a slow motion button at all.
And you want to make that game.
Yes, I think it could be so awesome, and there's so much stuff that could be so much cooler. Just precise a very precise method of gameplay, like, if this is fast and loose, I think it can get very tight and very precise and very deliberate with your actions.
Hmm. So, you, as a novice who is self taught over the last 4 years, is talking about this in a very passionate and excited way, clearly, and it's something that I resonate with very much. But it makes me wonder, though, if this is something that you can envisage being done with your current level. Then why haven't the veterans, who have lots of experience and who are already in VR, done this before?
I
Don't
genuinely don't have an
know.
answer to that question. I genuinely don't have an answer to that
Yeah.
question. It's the age-old thing is just, corporate shenanigans,
You think
but
so?
I mean, because there's even, smaller teams that, that have put out games that I feel like Vertigo too. Because whenever I mention a game, I don't mean to degrade the game in any way. None of this is I'm very passionate about this stuff,
Hmm.
and when I talk about a game, I by no means I don't view the industry or any of these games in a negative way. I'm just so passionate about, like, what it could be
Yeah.
that there's just so much that it could be. The game is good, but there's a version of it that could be so much better, and it's not a horrible thing that it's not. It doesn't, I don't wanna diminish what they've managed to achieve. But you take something like Vertigo 2, which it was made, by my understanding, by one guy, and I saw your interview with him too,
Hmm.
and, it's things that don't it's creative decisions that just don't make sense to me. I'm not sure why they do it. Like, he puts all this effort into the weapons and into all this stuff and into the enemies and the world design, and it's an incredible game. But then things like the enemies, right? it's like almost it's half physics and half not physics. Like there are physics interactions and it's clearly a physics-based game, but then, you gotta punch an enemy and it's not real and it's like it isn't, but it kinda is, but it's not really.
I think I
I
understand
don't
you.
know how to explain it.
Hmm.
It's, there's a degree where it doesn't take that little extra step, which I feel like and I'm not sure why, because I don't think I kind of get why. I take a much less, refined approach to making games, so I think
Explain that.
I did um, my game is very openly it's almo you wouldn't be mistaken for thinking it was kinda like a sandbox, because it's by no means is it a sandbox game, it's a linear game, it has a very specific, you know, directive. There is a very specific goal for the gameplay and for the game and the story. But I think games have a tendency to kind of cage you in and add restrictions and try to prevent the player from kind of going beyond some kind of play zone directive thing, whatever it is, which doesn't like for I think a decent-ish example would be you hop into the menu in this game, right? And or in my game at least, you hop into the menu and you can kind of float around and you can see your character and you can step away from the menu.
Hmm.
And that opens the way for stuff like, if you got real close to a door and then you go into the menu and you step through the door and then go out of the menu, you can kind of just glitch through the door,
Hmm.
which actually, no, this isn't a very good example because I could just teleport you back. I decide not to, which I might change into the future. I think, scratch that. Better example. Better example is scaling the player, right?
Okay.
With the player scaling, right? I'm not exactly sure how they do it in other games because it's definitely not the same way I do it. I take a very direct approach to doing it where the player rig is literally just scaled, which means if you crouch down to the floor and then scale your player, you can just like balloon up in size
Hmm.
and break the game completely. And but, but I don't really mind. As the game designer, I don't really mind because I think putting limits on that would make it, trying to this is this is a very horrible example as well. It's just caging the when you cage the player because of the arbitrary, the game needs to be played this way, so
Hmm.
we have to prevent them from doing certain things. It gets in the way of the player, and you can feel that you're being caged in. I think a good example this time would be Vertigo 2 again. A better example, a more clear example. When you reload a weapon, when you cock the shotgun, whatever, there is there is an implemented delay. There is a little animation plays.
Hmm.
Something There is a specific thing that forcibly delays the player. You could have done it faster, but the game designer is telling you no. It's like, and it's not baked into the design of the weapon. It is an arbitrary thing. It is an arbitrary, just like countdown timer telling you no, you can't do that until I say so. And as the player of the game, people might not be as pressed about it as me, but I get very pressed about it. I feel caged in by that. I feel like what? I could have done that. I can do that way faster.
Hmm.
If I can if I can find a way to reload the weapon faster, I think I should be able to reload the weapon faster. I shouldn't be caged into to do it at this exact way at this exact time.
Hmm.
And it makes sense. It makes sense from a game design perspective. The reload speed of the weapon impacts, how powerful the weapon is. But I think we just need to design the way I do it anyway is if I want it to take longer, I'm just going to design more complicated reload systems that take longer to do, rather than arbitrarily telling you, no, you have to wait for this cooldown and then you can shoot again.
I wonder also if such a feature was implemented to prevent some of the more specific VR abuse that we can see in shooters. An example that comes to mind immediately is in Pavlov, where you can reload a weapon in like 0.03 of a second. If you're good at it, if you just flick your controller in a certain way, and not only does it look bizarre, but there are balancing implications with that as well. Now, that is a multiplayer game, so it could be a different story. But do you think it's also so that when it comes to the actual gameplay side, because if we were reloading the Vertigo shotgun in real life, obviously we have to deal with the inertia and the weight of the weapon, grabbing the objects and putting it in accordingly, and all of that would take some time, whereas in a weightless VR world, if it's one-to-one tracking in that way, then we could just instantaneously jank the reload to happen, which I guess it's a matter of taste, right?
Yeah, it's a more personal me thing, I think. But
That's true
I
for
was
anyone.
meaning more to extend that idea of kind of that arbitrary telling the player, no, you can't do this, you can't go there. Like in Batman Arkham Shadow, I was playing that and it kept happening repeatedly where I'd want to be Batman. I'd want to do the Batman thing. I'd want to like grab. There'd be an enemy off to the side, and I'd kind of be below the guard railing. I wanted to just grab the rail, pull myself over behind the guy, and give him a bash. But and Batman Arkham Shadow, I think, is a very big offender for this because it's all animations. It's not a physics-based thing. But I just couldn't. They wouldn't let me grab the railing. I couldn't mantle over the railing, which annoyed me a lot, and it caused me to die because I ended up alerting the guy and then he shot me. But it's just, why does the mantling have to be restricted to these specifically designated areas where you're allowed to hop over the thing? There's a railing there. Why can't I just grab it with my hand and pull myself over? Why does it have to be a specific, okay, now you're allowed to do this. Okay, now you can do this. Okay, stop, not allowed to do that. Stuff like that. It doesn't, I feel like it gets in the way more than it aids.
So you're all about the freedom then in VR.
Yeah.
And have you managed to incorporate that well enough into your present game?
Maybe too well to a degree. It definitely, when you get to play it, because obviously I've made the game, so I've designed it around the way that I want to play it. So
And so you should.
yeah, so when you see the gameplay, it's played properly in quotation marks. But I think there is everything that can be done is built up not as like sequences, but as mechanics. It's all stuff just kind of baked into the character of the game, into the world of the game, into the player. It's not there's not set you can just kind of, if you can do something, you can do it at any stage in any area, you know?
Those are very big words. If you can do something, you can do it at any stage and in any area. So when you say you can do something, are you talking about the abilities of your character?
Yeah, the stabbing, punching, mantling off walls, grabbing enemies, doing like whatever. There's no point to restrict the player in any way, which lends itself very well to this kind of fast-paced game, which is much less of a the immersion of the game is in the speed less than it is again, I'll go back to Vertigo 2. I'll try to, because Vertigo 2,
Balzac.
it is no, this
It's
is
fine,
in
it's fine.
this is a positive thing. Vertigo 2, the immersion of that game is in the world and and it is in the weapons and the cool animations that play and all the cool visuals and all this cool stuff. That is the game. The game is all the cool, seeing the animations and being in that world. That is kind of the game. But in this, it's much more, the point is the speed itself. The point is just bulldozing through.
Mm.
So that freedom to just do stuff, to just be able to do stuff and let the player do stuff and let, if the player finds a way to abuse something, within reasonability, of course, but if the player can find a way to do something really well, I just chalk that up to skill ceiling, you
Mm.
know?
Sure,
It
sure.
it's part of the game.
So it sounds like there are two philosophies that I'm cottoning on to from what you've said thus far. The first one, it would be freedom. Freedom to do stuff in VR. The second one would be that you prefer mechanics-driven experiences, first and foremost.
Yeah.
Okay. When I
I
first
think,
saw... Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, I was just filling the air because I thought you'd stop talking.
No, no, no,
It
it's
was just
fine.
mechanics. The mechanics themselves, which I'm imagining very specific stuff. It probably sounds pretty nebulous just saying mechanics, but it's stuff. It's the weapons, being able to fiddle around with all the knickknacks and the funny way the weapon works,
Mm.
that being a tangible, real thing.
It's kind of the point of VR,
I'm
isn't it?
really into that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the appeals of stepping into the world in the headset and having your body tracked, or at least your controllers tracked, is that you can fiddle with things and rotate the weapon and examine it in any form and hold it in any way, as opposed to being locked down to a preset perspective and animation. It's one of the most basic joys of VR, I think, when you first start experiencing it.
Yeah, I think it's about taking that into the gameplay, making the depth of interaction part of the game,
Mm.
forcing you to interact with it and master it as the gameplay.
Your game is very physical. That's one of the things that struck me when I first saw the footage a long time ago on your YouTube channel, which will be linked in the description, by the way. There's a real sense of visceral physicality and reactivity from the actions that you do. It's not only the style that you've implemented, things like the reload, but just how I remember there was a test video you put on your channel where you're chain hooking around the place, and then you go up to one of the enemies that's just standing there as a dummy, and you sort of slam against him, and you get the Wolverine claw things and stab it into him, and I see the physics of his model react in a way that makes sense and responds to what you've done, and it looked really good, I have to say, and it's been done in a way that I dare say hasn't been delivered in quite that satisfying a manner from my own experience thus far.
I don't think I've done anything revolutionary here. I think I've got essentially a pretty taped together, mangled version of kind of Boneworks physics. Like it's just Unity. It's just
Hmm.
the Unity engine with the default configurable joints,
Okay.
which I don't know if you know what I'm talking about there, but if you've used Unity in any capacity, it's just a joint and a rigid body, and they're just connected together. So there's like tweaking to do with the weight of stuff, but I think it more comes down to games are arbitrarily restricting stuff. Like they're preventing themselves from just letting loose for some reason. I have no clue why. It's like Blade and Sorcery. There's so much positional um positional physics going on where things are just being forced into position. The way I do it is it's all rotational. It is around the hip, everything rotates. It's all it's all a rotational thing. There's no, like an actual joint. The muscle moves and it rotates around the joint. But something like Blade and Sorcery, the way I'm pretty sure they do it, which is why it feels so ethereal and kind of not real, is because it's positional. It's not rotating around a point. It's just kind of going there,
Yeah.
you know?
Hmm. Well, I don't know really. You certainly will understand
Yeah,
the.
I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, you will certainly understand these things more than me. I just know as a player that Blade and Sorcery definitely, whilst I appreciate what it's done, and it's definitely a good stepping stone for VR, its overall, its implementation is not my cup of tea. It's never felt good for me personally, and I've never enjoyed how abusable the AI is in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's was. I remember seeing YouTube vids, the montages with the high FOV, where I've now come to understand that they were playing in slow motion, usually the whole
Yeah.
time, but they just sped up the video to hide that. And this was before I got VR, and I was thinking, oh, this looks amazing. You're completely let loose, and you are free in this new paradigm of gaming. It's going to be so satisfying, and then the reality didn't quite pan out for me. I think that there's a lot of suspension of disbelief or lack of expectations that you have to have in order to get on with Blade and Sorcery, and there'll be some players who will take that as a slight against them, and I absolutely mean it too. No,
I think
I'm joking. I don't. Everyone has their own preference, but yeah, it never felt right, and I hated the way that the enemies always felt like they were trembling or wobbling around the place, like when they do a swinging animation. Their whole body just looks like it sort of wobbles from side to side, like it's about to go into a different dimension or something, and there's something fundamentally unstable and, as you say, almost ethereal and weird about how the game feels and plays that I just couldn't get on with.
I think I think my game specifically is able to sidestep that with the presentation of it. It is, the enemies, you like Boneworks, right? There's no enemies in Boneworks that run,
Mm,
and that's for that's for very good reason, because getting a run to happen is you have to tweak it very specifically, and also in many ways it just doesn't work. So but obviously there's enemies that run in this game, and the reason it works here is because it's completely nonsensical. They run like they I feel like I kind of don't even notice it, because it meshes with the style of the game, with the
mm,
feeling of the game. But if you took that and you put it into something like Blade and Sorcery, it would be or Boneworks, it would be absolutely horrendous.
mm.
The
The context
I don't
matters.
even Yeah. I think at this stage, with my knowledge at least, I could not do a proper enemy like that justice in something in a different context like Boneworks.
Yeah, yeah. The setting and context matters, and the presentation. Something that may be considered jank in one game may be completely appropriate for another, and there are so many layers of what would make that appropriate in one's mindset. So, having an understanding of the bigger picture of what the game is and the impression it's going to give will determine what kind of things you would add there. I would assume, again, as a non-designer person. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even a designer person really. I'm just
Well,
kinda
well, you kind of are,
I
aren't
just
you?
k
You've made your own. You've
well,
made your own game.
yeah, I am, but I kinda, not professionally. I'm just yeah, I'm all self-taught, right?
Well, we'll have to start
It's
somewhere.
come less yeah, it's come more from I don't know, from just kind of bashing your head against a wall until it works, until it's good enough, right?
Yeah, I think
You just kinda
that's the normal process.
I think the big thing with this game specifically is I've been very blessed to not have made it for kind of a specific purpose.
Hmm.
I'm only putting it out now because now it's at a stage where I'm able to kind of crank into overdrive and put something out. But the last, the last couple years, I've just been fiddling around with the weapons and the core of it, which not a lot of games get to do. They begin with a pitch to investors and they go, okay, we're going to make this game. It's going to be like this. Give us some money so we can make the game. And then they do. And now they're kind of locked into that and they have to do that. And then it ends up, they end up having to sacrifice a lot of what could have been for what is, I guess.
Mm. What stopped you from becoming obsessed and constantly tweaking and changing things to the point that you never actually get anything done?
I still am. I still am.
Oh, I see.
To a degree, I still am, but it's more to a point that I'm envisioning a future where I get to do another game with people smarter than me. I've kind of
Yeah.
resigned myself to I can only do so much, and I could definitely, instead of wasting my time trying to get this all perfectly perfect, I can get it really good, and then at some stage in the future, I'll be able to work with someone much smarter than me,
Yeah.
and then it will be perfect.
That's great. Lovely attitude. So you can say that what you're doing now, you're kind of making your own portfolio. You're showing what you're capable of by yourself, and then you're hoping that you can expand upon that and work with others who are more skilled and talented and get better and better.
Sort of. What I really, really want to do, like the big career plan goal would be get published, and then I'd want to run a studio,
Mm.
which would be pretty far off, but I would want to, like, just cards on the table. I don't think it's a terrible thing to be ambitious.
Absolutely not.
I would I would fully My dream career would be running a little game studio,
Mm. Yeah.
and just bringing to life all the ideas that I reckon could be done.
With VR specifically?
Yeah, with VR specifically, yeah.
Do you think that VR is going to be the future of gaming or just a thing on the side?
I don't think it's gonna take over, but, it's there's too much of a barrier to entry,
Hmm.
with even to make it as simple as just 1, motion sickness, 2, the simple fact that you have to stand up and put a thing on your head,
Mm.
that even after I got over motion sickness for the most part, just the bother of having to, like, mm, stand up and put a thing on my head has prevented me from playing VR for
Yeah.
ages.
Yeah. How long did it take you to get over motion sickness? And are there any techniques that you use to help yourself?
I'm probably not even over it. I still get, like, I think it just delays for me now. I still get it because I don't play VR a ton. I don't play games in general a ton anymore. But
Well, there isn't much to play, in all honesty, that's of decent quality and is replayable, at least in my opinion. Yeah, there are some nice experiences and a few standouts, but I would say the majority of what we get is very, very shallow, often not greatly made and or disappointing slop.
yeah, VR, I think it is definitely it's an industry-wide kind of it's an industry-wide kind of downturn across all of games, not just VR, but it hits VR. It's been hitting VR really bad
Mm.
because VR doesn't have the base of past games and it's much smaller, so I think on flat screen, indie creators have been picking up the slack, but in VR, there's not exactly
Mm.
you could hardly even call it an indie scene. It really isn't.
Yeah.
There's
You
kinda nothing.
You mentioned that. I have a video in the works where the topic is basically saying that I dislike remake culture. and I think it sucks, especially for flat screen, but I think that remake culture is actually ideal for VR. You mentioned before that VR doesn't have a past history. I would say the opposite and say that VR does, or rather, VR does have a past history to play off, in that we have all of these older games that we experienced and have moved the industry to where it is now, that we could revisit anew and fresh and experience in a whole new way using VR, kind of like what happened with Half-Life 2, where they got the source code and was able to put that very well into VR, and that we could not only experience those worlds again and be in them, but we could interact with them in ways that wasn't possible before. And I would have imagined that developers who have been in the industry for a long time and made those games might be interested in revisiting what came before from a fresh, new perspective, both in visuals and in interaction. I would have hoped that happened, but it hasn't really so far.
I think, not to be a contrarian
No,
or
do.
shut that down,
Do, man.
but I think the absolute dead opposite is what
Okay.
should be done.
Okay.
And so, I hate ports, VR ports of games with a passion, because
Most have been crap, yeah.
it's not just that they're crap. It is, in terms of game design, there is a fundamental difference at the most basic level between VR and flat screen. And I think porting, it can be done and it can be good, and there is potential in that. And I think, it would be cool to go and play other games in VR, but fundamentally, those games weren't built to be played in VR. If you play, if you play Half-Life 2, but you play the mod in VR, Half-Life 2 without VR is going to be the better of the two games, because it was built for a keyboard and mouse. It wasn't built for VR. And in the same way, I think VR games need to be built from the ground up, mechanically, design-wise, progression-wise, the way you progress through the campaign, the way enemies are structured, the way weapons are designed, the way they are literally designed, like the reloading mechanisms and the thought process of, how much damage it's going to do, how it's going to work in the game, needs to be thought about in the literal design of the weapon.
Absolutely.
Because you can't just play an animation and give it, a set reload time. It is, the reload time is the player interacting with the weapon. So you kind of need to bake all that into the design itself.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And if I were porting, if I were remaking an older beloved game or a well-known one in VR, then I wouldn't just port it one-to-one and, add some rudimentary motion controls. I would go in and tweak all of those things. For example, with Half-Life 2, I think the movement needs to be slowed down a lot in VR. And of course, if one slows down the movement, they would need to adjust how the enemies behave and the length of how one traverses through the level. I would also make it so that sprinting would only be possible if doing a bit of arm swinger or controller motion movement. I would do everything that I could, essentially, to using Vitriol, your game, as an example, which we probably should talk about a bit more, by the way, soon. Is that it would still look like Half-Life 2, and it would have it would be the same world, it would have the same items, but the way that the player is behaving and navigating through that world would be profoundly more human-like and physical, in a way that you would never expect to see Half-Life 2 ever be played. So if you were to put the gameplay footage side by side, on the left, you have the flat screen version where they're sort of turbocharging through the environment with WASD and zooming the camera around, and the gun is stuck to the screen and doing all that stuff. But on the right, you would have the VR version that's much more slowed down, and you can see the weapon moving and rotating in the 3D world, and you could see the arms moving in a way that you'd expect when the character is sprinting rather than just sort of zooming forward. And because of all the changes, you would see the player sort of ducking behind cover and blind firing and things, and interacting with the weapons in much more detailed ways. I would set out to do all of those things to really let the world loose. I think that's how a VR port could and should be done, at least with that sort of basic idea and philosophy. Because otherwise, I would agree with you that just porting it, in a very simple way would miss the point, I think.
Yeah, I think my point is that there is more potential in, if you have to do all that, you might as well just create a new experience. But I guess that's kind of beside the point, I guess, because I do get what you mean with the wanting to experience those games in
Yeah,
VR.
yeah. I actually don't have much of a desire to revisit things in that way. I'm not that kind of guy usually. But I think in terms of justifying and getting the consumer excited about VR, it's sort of like a proof of concept, I think. You take a beloved franchise or games that are well established and have made a big impression on the industry from devs and players alike, and you put it into this brand new context where the publishers and the devs who otherwise wouldn't pay attention to VR would see how transformative it is, and how the players like myself, who are in their mid-30s, who grew up with all of these things. I believe that there is an audience of millions like myself who have grown up with gaming in general, who have sort of seen it all. And I think that my kind of audience makes up a very significant chunk of what gets impressions online. And seeing the reaction from the gaming journalists and the YouTubers and the more mature, experienced audience, revering this kind of experience, this remaking of it, would really, I think, put VR on the map. But I think that your way is also equally as valid. I think that we are currently in a time in society where new ideas and new concepts and thinking outside the box is not so much of what we are doing these days.
The most recent comparison to what you're talking about would be Arkham Shadow, which kind of fumbled the bag, if I'm being
Oh
honest.
man, yeah. I don't want to get too much into that because I was thinking about doing a video. I got my hands on a MetaQuest 3 a short while ago. Arkham Shadow came bundled with it. I was looking forward to playing it. I was interested in the mechanics, and perhaps you may have different reasons why it fumbled, but for me, why it fumbled almost immediately was when I got into my first combat tutorial. I discovered very quickly that you just barely need to put any effort whatsoever into any of the moves that you do. You just have to do a very pathetic, suggestive little wave of your arm, and it will register as this forceful punch. And I checked out immediately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think to keep it very short, I think it was in the grand scheme, as it being a Batman game, it being like the big IP was not very epic, but I
Mm,
think the gameplay itself existing as it does, having a game that's like that, I think was valuable because it explored they had an idea of this all animation based. You move your hand to position and a thing happens and it's all animations and there
mm,
is there's two sides there's animation and there's physics, and they went all in on animation unapologetically, full force into it. And I think that's just kind of proven that that is not the way to go, but I think it was still they managed to squeeze something all right out of it, which I think I think it should have gone the other way, but I think having that there as an example is good as sort of not to, like, degrade the game, but as a as a cautionary tale, I suppose.
Hmm.
I think it's just not that it's a bad game, but that it resolved me anyway that I think physics is definitely the way to go. Refining the physics is the way to go.
Mm, mm. I agree with you that we can learn from every single creation, irrespective of how we think about it. I have a bit of a different opinion, though. I think that a balance between physics and animation is where it would be best, personally. But I wouldn't be able to go into detail about why that is. I just think that when you introduce too much physics, at least how we currently do it, there are too many limitations and too much room to mess it up, and getting a good mix of physics where it matters combined with animations would be the sweet spot for me personally. That's why Boneworks and Bone Lab, as impressive as they are, Boneworks more for me than Bone Lab. When it comes to the enemies and the combat, it's just so limp and fails so much because they go for the full physics approach, which paradoxically restricts you as a player and it restricts the enemies on what they can be because
I
it's fully
agree
physics
1,000,000,000%.
based. Yeah, the combat is it's just so dull, and because it's all physics based too, even when you shoot the enemies, there's no satisfying kind of animation or twitch. There is a little bit of a twitch and reaction, but not in a way that is satisfying or gives you feedback that you've actually affected them in some way. They just sort of slump over and barely react to what you do, and it's very unsatisfying. And I think that if they had implemented a sort of mix of animation and physics where it matters, that it could have been a much better result.
Yeah, I think the way I'm approaching it for this game specifically is kind of a stylized physics where it's all physics based, but if you pay attention, if you pay attention, I think the biggest offender is definitely the revolver. Its center of mass is completely horrendous. Like I couldn't even describe it. It looks if you try to set it down on a table, it like the handle flies up into the air and it like rotates around all weird,
Okay.
and it's it's horrible, and it's not realistic at all. But it's like that way specifically because it makes the parts where it matters much better. It makes it so that when you spin it around your finger, it makes it so that that is really smooth, so that can be completely
And
physics.
it looks
And
great,
the
by
way
the way.
yeah. Oh, thank you. It's, which I'm able to do in this game because this game does have an air of sort of duct tapedness sort of built into it. It's just kind of accepted, like, it's kinda baked into the art style, so it doesn't look that out of place. But definitely, honestly, I wish Rockstar, if we had,
Oh, the
like
physics in
Red Dead
Rockstar
for
get, yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
go on.
if Rockstar made a VR, I've been thinking this since Boneworks came out, 'cause the Boneworks physics has already existed for years in Rockstar games. Like, their player characters are all their player characters are physics-based, and the enemies are physics-based. You could if Rockstar just made a VR game, they could they could blow the
Yes.
whole thing out of the water. It could be insane.
I completely agree with you. I adore the physics in Red Dead Redemption 2. I looked up the physics engine actually. They licensed out an engine from a separate company who have now stopped licensing it out. So as far as I understand, Rockstar, they got the license many years ago. They're the only ones now who possess the engine to my knowledge. Which is a pity, because I completely agree
Mm.
with you. Having that kind of system in VR would just be amazing.
Yeah, the potential for AAA VR is insane, and it
Hmm.
sucks so much because AAA VR is the bit where they are restricting it the most. I think pretty consistently the AAA VR games have been the worst ones.
Hmm.
And even controversial take, even Half-Life Alyx, which
Mhm.
honestly the only thing I didn't like to Half-Life Alyx was a very good game, an extremely good game. The only thing that I didn't like was that the enemies were not physics-based. And that annoyed me so much because Valve has gone and Valve is making the VR game and the enemies aren't physics-based.
Hmm.
And I don't know, that just like I wanted to be able to punch one of the one of the Combine guys,
Hmm.
and you just can't. It's still an amazing game. I think it was just awesome. It was super fun.
Why was it amazing for you?
The one at that specific point, it introduced a lot of new stuff. Like the Half-Life Alyx grab method was really cool. But other than that, just as a game, they knew what they were going for. You know, they didn't. I wish they would have included melee as a thing. They knew from inception that it wasn't going to be that they weren't going to use melee, and so the game, it is a very intelligently designed game. It is designed around what is there. They knew what they were doing. They designed it for that, and they designed a fun experience around that. You know, it's just you don't need those things. You know, you don't need to be able to punch the enemies for it to be a good game. And Valve, they are very well versed in making games. They know how to make a good game. And it might not have all the bells and whistles, but it is still an incredible game. Like it is just fun to play in a way that can't be explained.
Presentation is amazing. Makes a hell of a
Yeah.
difference. Yeah. We should probably talk a bit about your game now. Would make sense, eh? So, you've gone for the PlayStation 1 style, with the warped textures and the models and such. Why did you go for that?
Cause I'm one guy. Apart from Eden, my music guy, a very good friend of mine, at Sweater's Music on YouTube and Instagram.
Nice plug.
He
Smooth.
yeah, he's made the music, but other than that, which I adore, and I really want to, because we just kind of set. I'm not very good at music. I've been getting into guitar and all that, but he's been doing it for a very 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 long time. They're incredible at that stuff. Love it to death.
Mm.
And I want to work with them to whatever I'm talking about to just push it forward like the rest of the game. I went off track. What am I talking about?
That's all right. I can hear something in the background, like
Oh,
something.
sorry. I started fidgeting with a cone. So
No worries. It was the PlayStation 1 aesthetic. I asked you why you went for that one specifically, and you said because you're one man, but I also want to probe a bit more. Do you like that kind of PlayStation 1 aesthetic, and what is it influenced by? Any particular game?
it is pretty clearly influenced by Ultra Kill. I can't deny those allegations, but and the game in
Never.
general. I couldn't, bro. I
Couldn't be.
don't even know what that game is.
Yeah, never
It
heard
is
of it.
very clearly an Ultra Kill VR analog.
Hmm.
But other than that specifically, I'm super into like the dark fantasy, kind of like not even Berserk, but like Berserk the show, the 1997
Mm.
Berserk show. That I love that to death. The style, the whole everything about it is insane.
Okay.
And like Alan Wake and Longlegs and Twin Peaks, I love that stuff to death.
Okay. Fair enough. And so it's influenced by a particular game which we've never heard of before, just by chance.
Yeah.
Is that the only thing, or was it easier to create graphics with the PlayStation 1 kind of aesthetic?
Oh yeah, it is. I oh yeah, it's easy to run. I think it definitely. I'm not sure because I still had to do. I'm not very obviously. I'm self-taught, so whatever optimizations I managed to pull together for this, I had to kind of figure out on the way. I'm not exactly an expert, but it runs. I'm able to do a lot more with have a lot more enemies, do a lot more with the physics than maybe Boneworks could, right?
Are you targeting Quest, by the way? You're going to release on PC
Oh
VR and Quest?
yes,
Yeah.
it is. It's on. It runs perfectly fine on Quest 3. Quest 2, I've tried it on Quest 2 very briefly, and it's the little FPS counter said that it was running at 72 frames. However, I don't know, it felt kind of weird. Like the tracking felt kind of weird.
The player physics was at half frame rate. Is that what you felt?
It might have been the physics were decreased, yeah.
Yeah,
The
there's a
literal frame rate was fine, but yeah.
yeah, there's a game that came out recently. It's called Chrome Dome in the Hyperdrome or something. I
Oh
forget
yeah,
the
I've heard of
precise
that,
name.
yeah.
It has the exact same problem right now on the standalone and the Steam version, where the game is running at 90 and the thing will say 90, but your player physics, your movements, and when you smooth turn, when you move your motion controllers are clearly at 45 FPS or half frame rate. So that may actually be just some kind of toggle that could be
Hmm.
causing it. Yeah, and it's happened in other Unity engine games actually. So there's
Hmm.
something going on there that maybe you could fix.
Well, it's good. It's good you mentioned that because I'll be able to. I wouldn't have looked into that otherwise.
Ah,
But
yeah.
I'll give that a look now. Let's give it a bit of hope
Good stuff.
because it's in a state. If it was for a free demo, it's in a state where I'd be fine releasing it as a free demo, but I
Hmm.
wouldn't. I'd hesitate to charge for it. If it was running like that for a full release, I'd hesitate to put it on there.
Sure.
So it is something to be looked into.
I want to go back to optimization and take the chance to ask someone like yourself. You say you're inexperienced and that you haven't had a chance to do that much optimization and so on. What is optimization? Could you give me an example? Could you give me an example of an action that you undertook that was an optimization to improve performance? Like what did you specifically do that you would class as an optimization?
Yep. So there's two kinds. I would consider there to be two kinds of optimizations. There's my code, and then there is Unity, the game engine. My code, in terms of your code, all the code that you write, it's pretty simple. Just don't put horrendous stacking loops that are going to kill the game in update, and you'll be fine.
Why do loops kill the game? What's wrong with loops?
Not loops necessarily, but just things. If it's going to be running a whole bunch, you don't want it. If it is possible to have it not run every frame, do not have it run every frame.
Right.
Pretty much.
Sounds like common sense to me.
Yeah. So code, in terms of my own code, it's common sense. But even then, at that point, at that point, just with that, it was running at like 40 frames on the Quest 3. What I did to fix that was not my own code. It was Unity. It's mostly the GPU. It's the amount of times it renders. Pretty much is what I've found.
Mm-hmm.
So it is. There's a bunch of toggles and little things you can fiddle around with. It's kind of just being familiar with it. But there's stuff like the best example would be baking lighting, right? Like real-time lights versus baked lights. You want to bake the lighting would be the most obvious thing so that it's just one calculation and then so the lights aren't recalculating every frame, right?
Mm.
And then there's a couple other workarounds you do so that it's like you mark all the objects that are going to be static that aren't going to move, so then those get baked, and then for the enemies and the player, I can have it so that only the objects that I specifically mark for are going to be moving. Only those are affected by like the real-time light. So there are some real-time lights,
Uh,
and it's just kind of picking and choosing. It's not a very hard rule. The I suppose the biggest thing really is reducing the number of like meshes and materials, the number of individual objects and individual colliders. If I make a room and the floor is like made up of 6 colliders when it could have been, just one really big one, that all of those 6 colliders are being included in all the physics calculations, and same with the meshes. All 6 meshes are being included in, the GPU when it renders. So if I can mash those all into one, then I've just reduced the GPU load by 6 times.
But how would you know whether a floor is supposed to only have one rather than 6? How would you discern that information about what's appropriate and what's not?
It is just it's kind of common sense as
Okay.
well. It's more the fact it's a lot can be done. It's just kind of if you can be bothered going through and trying to do all that, because it can, especially when rooms get more complicated than just like a box with 4 walls and a roof, it does become a bit of a, kind of playing Tetris with the way you mash together walls.
Hmm.
And there's stuff like the rooms, only 2 rooms will be loaded. For the most part, only 2 rooms will actually exist at a time. They load and unload as you move through, which is kind of a given. Optimization isn't as complex a thing as it kind of sounds. Before I got into it, even like 2 months ago, I hadn't specifically looked into the optimizations for Quest until like 2 months ago. And before that, it was like this daunting thing that I didn't really want to look at because it sounded scary and it sounds complicated. And it really just is not. It's super basic, common sense stuff.
Okay, well, thank you very much for explaining that. It's always good to have a better
I,
understanding as a layman. You were going to say?
I definitely, I wouldn't completely write it off altogether. There is,
Right, but what of
for my
optimization?
purposes, yeah, for my purposes, and just like, all the rooms are pretty much just boxes, and I'm able to section everything off into rooms.
Hmm.
Something like Boneworks, where it is much more complicated textures, objects, mostly, open spaces. I couldn't even begin to imagine how they are supposed to do that. I have my very basic methods, but I don't know what they would do. Because the best, as far as it goes to my knowledge, is stuff like, when it's really far away, you swap it out for a different model that has less polygons, right?
LOD, yeah.
Yeah. So it's I don't know. To my knowledge, it's not too complicated, but my knowledge is also very surface level.
Hmm.
So
I see. I really like the physicality of your game. I think that you have something special, though I'm not sure how to explain it. There's something different about your game, and I'm not tooting your horn or anything. There is something
no,
about
you can toot my horn.
Okay. Well, we can do that in private. That's fine. Um, yeah, you've done something. You've done something. You, from my perspective, you seem to have a grasp, or you seem to have an innate understanding of the satisfying physicality that is not overly done with physics or overly restrictive because of physics either. You seem to have struck, at least visually so far, because I've not played the game, you seem to have struck a balance. I don't know, just maybe it's the way that you move and play as a player, like it will be demonstrated in the background footage here also, but there's just something about the way that you've done the physics and the reactivity, even in this really simple context with a simple art style, which, by the way, I adore this art style. I'm definitely biased, definitely because of my age, and I'm not normally nostalgic about these things, but there is something extremely appealing to me about the PlayStation 1 era textures. And the models. There just seems to be a kind of life and vibrance to them artistically, which I think pops even more in VR. So I
Well, I
really,
appreciate it.
yeah, and I think that you've done a fantastic job. And at the beginning of the clip that you sent me, you were messing with the downscaling, and you said that you like it. I also like it too. Again, there's just something about it that when you downscale it a bit, and it has that more, that less clean and smooth look, it seems to bring the scene to life more in a way, because it's moving around more. But it's really good. I think it's an excellent fit for both VR and for what you've gone for, combined with the physicality that you've done. And I can only hope that the viewers and the listeners can understand what I'm talking about through the background footage. It's something so natural that you would expect from VR, but it's very hard to describe for me, at least. But you seem to have got it, and there's something special there, I think, that will appeal to people in a way that they may not even be able to describe themselves or realize. But I think it will. That's my hunch.
I think for me, the way I've designed everything is, at least with physics, is I'll just call it like stylized physics. I think
It's good.
if you said you'd listen to my other videos, which honestly, terrible decision. Those are horrible. But
It's interesting for me as a
it's
player.
I maybe I just hate listening to myself, but I can't watch those for the life of me. I keep trying to get it right, and it keeps either way. The the physics itself is so far from anything realistic,
Mm.
but for me, it feels so good because everything, and I mean like everything, the enemies, the weapons, everything that exists in the world has been tweaked in some way to make it so that what you expect to happen happens rather than what would happen,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. And I completely agree with that too. I think that a lot of devs or a lot of other games have dropped the ball with their physics in trying to make them too realistic as opposed to just what you expect or what is fun or enjoyable. Physics is just a tool in this context, after all. And yeah, I really get you there and completely agree with your philosophy on it. I think if you continue down the path that you have something. I can't say how, I can't say why, but I think that you have something. And I think that your passion and your desire to take things in a certain direction in VR is a direction that I resonate with, at least. Also, going back to your YouTube channel, you released a video talking about inverse kinematics and specifically the elbow when trying to do arms. Now, this is something that I, as a player, had been thinking about for a long time. And what made you make that video? Were you hoping that other devs would see it, or were you hoping to put yourself on the map, or?
I wasn't expecting. I mean, obviously the video didn't take off, and I wasn't expecting it to. I just kind of wanted one. It was something I could talk about, just about the game, because I've with my videos, I can't for the life of me muster up, this is how I made my dream game in 7 days. I physically cannot make that happen. I don't know. It's like an ability. I don't know how people do it. I just can't. I couldn't make that kind of thing. So it was something to talk about, and I also it's not information that I want to hoard because I feel like it's not a perfect system, but it's a system, and it's not being done, and it doesn't make sense why it's not being done.
Right.
And I feel like it's such an applicable thing that would make legitimately every single game better.
I agree.
It does not make sense why it hasn't been done before. And I think Nimsoni has done. I think looking at his videos, I'm pretty sure he has the elbows or some kind of similar elbow system down where it's not just in one static position. But then his thing is like, who knows how far off his project is?
Yeah, that's one of my concerns about him is As impressive as it is, what he's done, he very much strikes me as the quintessential solo dev, get lost in his own project forever and ever and ever and never actually release anything, even though he is public and he's releasing progress videos. I don't know, from my life experience, he just strikes me as the type that's vulnerable to that. And so seeing all those things he's done is great, but I'm at the stage of, as a user now, where I'm like, yeah, that's all lovely and great, but can we actually see this put into something that can move the industry forward? And I'm not completely sure whether he will come through. Only time will tell.
My understanding, and I'm not sure, for some reason, I feel like I heard it somewhere. I don't know why or where, or I couldn't name exactly, but I'm pretty sure he was intending or is intending to turn it into an actual video game. Like, he was struck between whether it would just be like an asset package or if he'd make it into a game, and I'm pretty sure he's going to make it into a game. But who knows how far off that is.
Right, yeah. How many years will that be? And then the industry would have changed and so on and so forth. And then he'll go back to the drawing board. And yeah, this is my concern about the feeling that I get from him. But again, time will tell. And it's great that he's done this stuff. But as a user, I want to see results that I can interact with and play with, really. And as you said earlier, these things that you mentioned, like about the IK, it doesn't make any sense, does it? It really doesn't make any sense. And I don't get why. Have you any idea why? I really can't think of why either.
It's one of those things that people had to have thought about.
Yeah.
But it's been left on the cutting room floor for some reason. I think all of this stuff mechanically, with all the potential, it is just like a horrendous industry-wide misallocation of resources. Like, they're putting all this energy and manpower into like the wrong stuff, and just because something, some features, some stuff has to be left out at some stage. You can't do everything. But for all the cool stuff they do, it's one of those things like, why not give it a shot? I don't know.
Do you think that there's a misunderstanding about VR still in the industry despite all of these years?
There has to be. There has to be some kind of, especially with this, like, what Behemoth coming out, and it's got like they're turning the Walking Dead Saints and Sinners style of game and HUD like into a standard thing. That is not the way to go, dude.
Why?
They're like, because it's a good, and I would like, it is what it is, but it's not what I want it to be. I think it could be better. I think it's.
Could you elaborate on more detail? Because I've never played Behemoth before. So when you say that they've implemented the Walking Dead Saints and Sinners style, what exactly have they done there that doesn't work in that context, in your opinion?
It's this HUD and like stamina system, and just the way objects like you swing something and then it sticks into them, and it doesn't stick into them because you swung it at them and that's where it landed. It sticks into them because you swung with force at X area, now implant into enemy, right?
I see.
I don't know. It's a system that could be better, and they didn't really. I do not want to see it become standard, and I don't know why they would, because it's a very stylized system. It felt like it kind of worked for Walking Dead, but it should have been something different for this game, and I don't know why they're it felt like to me, I guess there's not much precedent because it's the first game to continue on with it, but it felt like they were starting to set a precedent where that's like the standard VR rig thing, which kind of irked me a bit, but I don't know.
I get what you mean. And I agree with you for the most part. I think that there's a balance which can be struck where you can sort of hide the effect, and if the animation's done well enough, or if there are other accompanying systems to provide feedback, joyful feedback to the player, then one can get away with it. But otherwise, yeah, Yeah, I get what you mean. A really bad example of that for me would be Arizona Sunshine 2, where you just
Mm,
hover the melee weapon vaguely near the enemy's head, and if you go past a certain zombie's head, and if you go past a certain velocity, then it just sort of teleports into their head in one frame at a set place.
mhm.
It looks abysmal and feels worse in VR. Um,
It it kind of feels like with the mechanics that are being made, it feels kind of like they've been dreamt up in a boardroom and then they've told the developers to make it. Like someone who is not the developer is masterminding the thing, and then the guys who are actually in it and making the stuff are not the ones in control of what's being made,
mm,
which is something I was really excited for Bone Lab, which made me really disappointed that Bone Lab was more of a mod platform than it was a game, because Stress Level Zero is it's like it's the company that's ran by devs. It is I really thought they would kind of be the ones to evolve the VR interaction and take, the Boneworks physics to the next step, but they just kinda they refined it, made Marrow, turned it into kind of an engine and a mod support, and, which disappointed me because I thought they would take it more as a game and start evolving the game aspects less
yeah.
than the physics aspects, but yeah.
Do you think the Quest 2 had anything to do with that?
Um, I don't know. I have not thought about that before. I suppose they definitely no. No, I don't reckon it would have. I don't think it's a technology issue anymore. It's a design issue, you know?
Okay.
It's not that stuff isn't possible, it's that stuff just is not being done, you know? It's a misallocation of resources.
Hmm. Do you think my impression so far is the VR industry is still uncertain of how physical it wants to be, or that there is a kind of fear about being more physical, or that they're trying to account for too many scenarios at once, and that's kind of causing them to behave in these nonsensical, weird ways and designing these abstracted things which don't satisfy anyone in the end. Well, at least for me. Um, do you get any similar impression about the industry, that there's sort of like an uncertainty or a holding back or a fear of having the player be encouraged to just sort of turn and move more and be more physical?
I think in the recent video I posted, it was word for word. It was like there is a tangible sense of holding back in in the industry where they're not for some fear of something, with motion sickness or some lack of trust in the players. It They're restricting things and holding back what it could be just out of a lack of confidence, I guess, you know?
A lack of confidence about what? That they'll get sales if the player has to move more?
I I don't know. I think it's like a lack of confidence in the competency of the player. Like
Hmm. Yeah.
it feels like a lot of very silly decisions like very handholdy decisions that don't that take away from the experience just so they can kind of I like every game wants to be the introductory game.
Yeah.
They want to be the game that people play as their first game for VR. They want to be the guys that are first through the door that get to the new players,
Yeah.
and they're not really so ideas aren't being explored as deeply or as intensely as they could be.
I think that's very well said. Every game is trying to be the introductory game for new players. Yes, that's a good perspective. Using the gameplay footage in the background for your game as an example, it looks really engaging with how you play, because there are so many subtleties with how the design has encouraged you to be more physical, such as when you spin the revolver, your head naturally sort of bobs up and down a bit,
Oh, yeah.
which really lends, combined with the spectator camera with a wider FOV, which again is a very important thing, I think, rather than having a super cropped, super zoomed in one-eye view where you can't see anything. Yeah, just...
That was another thing. The
No,
to
no, go on.
interrupt. For some reason, so many games, they don't have like a streamer mode where you have like that. It's an option in the menu to toggle that wide FOV that you're seeing in the video. For some reason, they just don't have that, and it's just that weird cropped out single eye view, and it just looks horrible. And it's
Render
such a
budgets,
simple
maybe?
fix. Yeah, it definitely, from experience, you can't toggle that on when you're in the quest. It like halves the frame rate. It completely kills it. But on PC, it should at least be an option, you know, because it makes it look so much better.
Yeah, it really does too. Again, like with the head bobbing when you're spinning the revolver and your spectator cam is a little bit smoothed as well, correct? Seems
I
like it.
I have not implemented anything specifically for that.
Okay, well, if it isn't, then it still looks lovely and stable. Maybe that's just a byproduct of the FOV.
It might actually just be the game, because if we're comparing it to other physics-based games like Blade and Sorcery or Bone Lab, you'll notice when you play those games, you have like the actual player model like bobs because you know it's being pushed up by like a force, like the legs are pushing off the ground. So it kind of bobs, and when you hit the ground, you kind of bob down and then come back up in those games. It could just be a byproduct of this game. There's nothing like that. You're just like a solid block that grinds along the floor. So there's no like intricate leg system.
I see. Well, either way, it looks great, and there's something very uniquely human to the VR gameplay that you display there, because there are so many subtle implementations of physicality so far that I've seen. Another thing that you've also done, which can't be heard in this video because I will have it muted, is you've also put more attention to detail than even full teams of devs would do into just basic sound of the environment, and having that be a decent quality, and things like shaking the revolver and picking up the weapon makes an appropriate sort of clinky clunky sound, which is just, matters so much, man. But it is another one of those massively overlooked things in too many VR games, and that's super appreciated too.
This game is not a particularly, by my standards, not nearly as much. Like what I'm doing with the stuff that I implement in this game is, I feel like, not that far above what
I completely agree
just
with
be
you.
a given.
Yeah, you're not doing anything remarkable at all. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, I'm praising you, and and I'm very grateful. But what you're doing is the bare minimum, if that, which is barely achieved in many other games.
It is. The industry is just lazy. That's why I'm so eager to like you know, I really want like to work with other people on this stuff, to do like a studio, to work with a team, because I feel like this is pretty ass, to put it like without a better term. It's just it's mechanic, like as a purely gameplay, it's fun, but I think in terms of everything other than the pure literal gameplay, which is kind of a nebulous term, but everything around it, like I have no formal training in this stuff. I have no experience in this stuff. I'm not a game designer. I just like games, and I'm kind of mishmashing what I think is fun. So it should be, in a more developed industry, in a more developed ecosystem, this like whatever I can make should be the absolute bottom of the barrel. But it's not, because the industry is in such a horrendous state.
Well, I'm glad that there are people like yourself who are willing to add your own little drop into the ocean anyway. It will make a difference, even if that difference is intangible. I think it will. And I do believe that what you've done so far, from what I've seen, will be received well. And again, I think subconsciously, especially the kind of details that you and I may be aware of when it comes to the physicality and the sound and the reactivity, I think subconsciously that's going to jive well with players who otherwise wouldn't notice it, but it just feels good. Tell me more about your release plans for the game then. You said it's going to come out in February, and then is it early access and so on?
There'll be a free demo out in hopefully like 2-3 weeks. Sometime February. I was aiming for mid-February, but that'll end up kind of depending on however long it takes to fool around with store pages. But I'll keep, because I'm so passionate about this stuff, I would keep working on it anyway. But I really, really want badly to work with a publisher,
Mm.
because doing this on the side of just like part-time job for minimum wage is not particularly epic. And because I was studying, I've dropped out of uni, which does not sound like a very good decision, but frankly, I am very, there's no other thing that I'd want to do now. I'm so, intent on this. I really want, I want to get a publisher, and then I can release an early access, it would probably take a year or two to get the first kind of half of the game done, release that as early access, and then, you know, kind of sort of similar to the Ultra Kill rollout, to draw more comparisons.
So probably going to be a handful of years until it's fully released from now, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So probably at least what, a 4 or 5 year dev cycle of actually making a game rather than experimenting.
Yeah, I think I have a very solid idea of the scope of this game. It's pretty much set, and most of the weapons, environments, the way it's going to go, it is going to be it is going to be structured very much like Ultra Kill. You
Mm.
go through kind of wildly different environments as kind of sets of levels, and you just kind of blast through those till the game's over. And it would be, a couple level sets would come out at once. So the first release would probably, I'd want the first release to be like half the game. It is going to be a shorter game than Ultra Kill. I definitely don't want to take. It's probably going to end up taking 4 or 5 years anyway, but I don't want to spend. I don't want to spend more time than is necessary, because I think in 5 years time, in 5 years time, the base that this is built on is going to be pretty outdated for what I want to do. And I would, because what I'm really excited about is the mechanics and what could be done. So I am very eager to kind of get on to the next game.
Mm. Would you take on help for this one if it were offered?
It depends on what capacity, I guess, and kind of how. I definitely will need help and want help, but it comes down to obviously at the moment I couldn't exactly pay anybody,
Sure, sure.
and I am apprehensive to giving up like
Control.
percentages of stuff, and like control, stuff like that. So the ideal route would definitely be get a publisher, work with them, and maybe they have resources, maybe they can lead me on to ways to, they'll have people who are kind of in it, who are in the industry, who would know how this stuff works. I'm very excited about the game, very excited about getting the demo out. It's very much, it's a bit of a race, because I want it. I'm like I'm right there, I'm right on the precipice of doing it, and there keeps being more and more, things that need to be fixed, things that need to be done, stuff taking longer than it should. So it definitely, we're in the final stretch, but I'm very intent on getting it done. I'm working very intensely on it.
Give me an idea of an intense workday. How many hours per day?
Literally all day, dude.
Mm,
I
I figured.
I'm yeah, I'm in, which is not. a month ago, I had a much healthier daily routine, but I've just because right now I'm the only one in my flat at the moment. So and for the next couple weeks, so it's very easy for me to just kind of wake up, bang away at it literally all day. You know, I just I just do it all day, pretty much. I take a bit of time to listen to some music, make a meal,
Yeah,
but it would be more than 10 hours a day.
yeah. And if you could, I would guess, you would find a way to eliminate the need to eat and do those bothersome
Yeah.
things so that you could
Yeah.
just continue working more and more, right?
Yeah, it is definitely I'm aware of what I'm doing because I'm a pretty healthy person. My mental health is doing completely fine. Like this is I'm not like getting paranoid and obsessed about it. I'm just very excited about it, so I'm willing to sacrifice more stuff to get
Mm,
it out there.
yeah.
And once it is, I'm gonna reel back a lot and reset kind of my schedule.
Seems to be the way with the industry and making games. Inevitably, with the process,
Mm.
you just fall into sort of like the grind, it would seem,
Yeah.
and the crunch, as they say. Just a part of being a passionate creative. I think it can't be avoided.
Mm. The closer it gets to getting out, the more it's like, oh, if I just spend an extra couple hours, this thing could be done by the end of the day, and then I'm basically like I'm even closer to it, you know?
Yeah, of course. Of course. How are you feeling about the idea of getting it out into the public and getting feedback from players, especially with the way that we communicate on forums and things? And are you going to make your own Discord? And yeah, how are you feeling about handling the PR side of things and player testing and feedback?
I I'm not gonna do my own I'm not gonna do my own Discord just because a lot of, everything to do with the social media and like a Discord community management, that would be like, I would need moderators for that
Yeah.
stuff. Like I'm one dude. Like and all my time is going into the game. I have no desire to even scraping together stuff for the social media is kind of bothersome for me. I
Mm.
don't really like doing it, which is why it's been pretty lackluster. But I definitely I'm excited to get it out. I will be looking at the reception and kind of taking notes, seeing how it goes, and I'll definitely be obviously immediately after release trying to make sure there's no like game breaking bugs cropping up out of nowhere. But it really is hoping and praying that I can get picked up by a publisher with more resources
Mm.
because otherwise I'm going to have to really work to scrape something together.
So after you've released the public demo, are you going to then, and after you've polished it up, are you going to then take that and approach publishers yourself?
Uh, Pretty much, yeah. I'm not too familiar with how it's supposed to work, but I'm just gonna start, as soon as the demo's out, I'm gonna email email a couple publishers and just kind of hope and pray that they get back to me or that maybe the game takes off and I get found by somebody.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm definitely riding on the hope of a publisher.
I see. Well, that's pretty much all that you can do. Put yourself out there.
Mhm.
Hope that you get picked up. And yeah, again, I think the game will resonate well with players, and the physicality of it will definitely be a breath of fresh air and leans towards the positives of VR for sure. But yeah, we will see how it goes. I certainly will be interested in playing it and seeing how it feels too, and seeing if it feels as good as it looks in the footage.
I'll be looking forward to the teardowns to the because
Yeah,
it definitely as with all physics VR games, it can be janky. But I don't do any in the gameplay that the audience will be seeing. I'm not doing anything special to avoid the jankiness. And there is stuff there is stuff in there that pretty obvious stuff that can be polished up and that I intend to before it gets released. But every now and again, there is just like some horrible, unexplainable bug in like the physics that is like insane. And I don't know what it is, and I can't trace the origin of it. And I don't know how common it's going to be. And I'll just kind of have to see. It's not game breaking by any means. I mean, sometimes it can be, but it doesn't happen often. It doesn't happen often enough that I've noticed it more than like a. I haven't noticed. It hasn't happened enough that I've been able to like draw a correlation to like draw an origin of the problem.
Sure.
It'll be like once a month, some insane strike of lightning happens. I'm like, whoa, that is an insane problem that needs to be fixed. And then I can't replicate it for the life of me. So it really, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, sure. Well, having the force multiplier of many, 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 many other people experiencing it will, and hopefully a small percentage of them will give you some feedback that might help you in that regard, maybe. And yes, brace yourself for the inevitable, unreasonable feedback that will come also from players who, I'm sure you're familiar with social media,
Yeah.
but yeah, you know how people online can be.
I can guess as to what the range of reception, but I'm very excited to get it out there. Very
Good.
excited to hear from people. At the end of the day, I mean, I kind of, I'm making it. I'm making the game that I wish existed. So I'm very curious to see what problems people have with it and what can be improved. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to get it out there. I'm excited to see what there is. If somebody doesn't like it, I think I'll
It's
try
going
to
to
take it
happen.
into consideration.
Mm.
Yeah. I think I want to make an effort to consider negative opinions about the game, but I mean, I don't reckon I'm gonna be crying about it. So I'll be trying to consider it though. I don't think I take very. I feel like it'd be hard to take offense for some reason. For me, the internet is just kind of like words on a screen. It feels very disconnected.
Mm.
So I will put in effort to consider what people have to say though.
Sure, sure. Well, I can only wish you the best of luck in that
Mm.
endeavor, dealing with the internet population. Hmm. In regards to the game itself, I can't think of anything else that I want to ask. By this point, the footage would have played on a loop for quite a while now. I'm looking forward to giving it a try. And again, I can only say in a very vague and intangible way that there's something about what you've done that is very appealing to me, and the way that you just something about the physicality of it again. Yeah, I am looking forward to giving it a try. I'm glad that you're making this product, and I'm glad to be able to talk with you about it too. And of course, glad as a player that I will have the chance to give it a try and see how it goes.
Well, thank you, and I'm excited to get it out there. Thank you for doing the interview. It's definitely
It's
I
been a
can't
very
ignore the
technical
fact that
one.
I have about 37 subscribers on my YouTube at the moment, so this is this is definitely you're putting me up on a platform. So I can't I can't downplay how significant that is for me. It is definitely a massive help, more than I could have scraped together. So I appreciate it a lot.
That's what I'm here for. That is my part to play in this little game. And yeah, I'm going to put you up on that platform, and you are just going to be inundated with at least 3 or 4 new subscribers. It will be a lot to handle.
Yep, it'll be.
You're going to be
I'm very
swamped.
excited.
Yeah, swamped with about 5 new subs.
An extra comment on one of my videos, it'll be epic.
Yeah, an extra comment here and there. It's going to be a lot to deal with. I hope it doesn't distract from your dev duties too much, but I'm sure that you'll find a way.
Yep, I'll figure it out. Thank you.